Hey, welcome to shooting some macro photography. Now I've got a DSLR here with a macro lens. It's actually a 105 millimeter lens that has the ability to shoot macro. Now I've got some pretty flowers right here. Now the really cool thing about macro photography is that the surrounding area looks kind of dead, right? But there's this really beautiful yellow flower right here, and macro basically lets us get macro focus. We're gonna get really tight on it and take a picture. So let's check out and see what it looks like to begin with. So I'm getting really close to it. You can probably see in the video camera how close I have to get to it. And you see what kind of image it produces. So check these out. It's a little blown out. I'm a little overexposed right now, but you can see how we can see the little tiny details inside that flower. Now with a macro lens, typically that macro side is all the way to the other side and you have to switch it over to macro. And every lens is different. So keep in mind and look at the manual for your specific macro lens on how to activate that macro mode. So right now I'm in autofocus and you can hear the lens as it's trying to find its focus. Now shooting macro, the planes are so minute and little and you can sort of see how the autofocus is having trouble catching exactly what you want. Check it out. So the lens is trying to find, as the flower is moving in the wind, it's jumping from the follicles to the inside of the flower to the outside, and I can sort of position where I want the focus to be and aim for that. Now, that's a little hard when you're shooting a little flower moving in the wind. Even though it's moving just a little bit, we're so tight that those little movements are so big. So I'm gonna switch over to manual focus, and now I'll really be able to dial in exactly when I wanna get in focus. And you can see every little movement that you do is gonna adjust the picture immensely. So I'm gonna get in there and I really am trying to get as much as I can on one plane to make this photo pop. Let's get down there and check it out. So now I've got complete control. I can kind of decide where I want to put the focus much easier than the autofocus will. And I'll take a couple shots while I'm down here. So let's check out these. You can see how I'm really close up. You can see how bright the yellows are, how great the blue is, and how close we can see the detail in the little tiny follicles inside the plant. It really looks awesome. Another tip that I've noticed when you're shooting macro is not only will you be able to focus like this, but if you make small movements forward or backward, it'll make a huge difference. So if you can't really dial in here, dial in between your movement like that and here. It's very little movement though, very subtle. Even that much will change the focus a ton. So also something to mention is I'm shooting at an f/22 right now to get as much in focus as I can. Even though there's so many glass elements going on here, there is still a lot out of focus. If I was to shoot at, I can't do this right now because it's so bright outside, but if I was to shoot at a 2.8 and try this, there'd be so little in focus that it would be kind of hard to distinguish what you're shooting. If that's your style, if that's what you're going for, you can go ahead and try it. I think it would be really helpful to have a tripod. That's another tip that I'm not actually practicing right now, but I'm getting frustrated trying to get this ant, this moving flower, everything in focus while trying to keep my hands steady. You're just so close and so tight and so small that every little movement makes a huge difference. So using a tripod would really help a lot and it'd probably save your back and your patience. All right, so I got a little tiny dime here and I'm shooting it with our macro 105 lens and it's looking pretty cool. Check out these shots. It looks huge in frame. You can see how much macro photography really changes perspective and what you can do with it. Here's some with a little drop off in focus. You can see just FDR's face is in focus and it drops off to the back of his head. And then we go over to the just centered where the whole entire plane of focus of the dime is in focus, and then you see the shadow drop off in it. You can see how dramatic the shadow that's coming from the dime looks when we're shooting macro, when in reality it's so tiny. Like compare this little tiny thing against my face to this photo. It looks giant. So that's a little bit about macro photography, and keep in mind it's just another style of photography that you can really have fun with, get creative with, and really show off this tiny, tiny world and make it look big and enormous. Another really cool thing about macro lenses is they tend to be 2-in-1. So not only is this lens a macro lens, but it's also a 105 millimeter lens, which is actually a pretty good portrait lens in and of itself. It's a prime, but it's also a macro lens.